We'll just move that first item down. Let's do, go to the OA rezoning project first. Jonathan, we're just gonna change the order a little bit since Bunk's not here yet. We're gonna start with that third thing.
Okay, I'd like to call the Planning and Zoning Committee meeting together here in order, and our fellow will be coming in to join us shortly. I want to thank everybody for coming tonight. It's a great crowd. And we're going to start with the OA rezoning project. Jonathan.
Yes, ma'am. So OA is one of our new zoning districts from Recode last year. It's shorthand for outdoor amusement, and it's a new district really designed for the area immediately around Carowinds and Carowinds itself. It's directly as a result of the Exit 90 small area plan that was done a number of years ago. And this rezoning project is similar to the Parks and Recreation District rezoning from a few months ago. So staff has a list of parcels that we are recommending be rezoned to OA, most of which are currently zoned UD. That's our legacy district that we're trying to phase out over time. So we'd like to draft a list of parcels to be included in a motion, because a council-initiated rezoning needs to be initiated through a motion of council. So probably the most efficient way to do that is if we provide that directly to the Planning and Zoning Committee chair for you to read out at a council meeting.
That's a small area plan. That's really a Carowinds small area plan. It encompasses, it looks like it encompasses a lot of different things that are already there.
Correct.
Is that, okay.
Yeah, it's really intended to, it wouldn't affect anyone's property all that much. As you can see, most of the properties are already developed. So this would put them into a conforming district. Some of the existing uses might not be conforming today in the UD district, and this will help them with that. And it helps implement that small area plan.
So because it's specific to that small area plan, are there other areas that the OA would apply to in the county?
No, it's really only intended to be
Okay.
In and around Carowinds. So if another property in another area of the county were interested in some of the uses that OA allows, we would directly apply for a different commercial.
Okay, that's what I was going, because you got fireworks stores and stuff like that on here.
And
So.
the liquor store.
And the liquor store.
That
Amusement,
says
it's all amusement.
It's
all
not
about
permitted. Yeah, I mean.
Good, yeah, so anything that is existing, they wouldn't be forced to vacate their
Right, okay.
use or anything.
Okay. But if they decide to sell,
Yes, and a lot of this area would be subject to redevelopment in the future, just given its location next to the interstate. So that rezoning it now, especially for some of the vacant properties there, and I know council is in the midst of an applicant submitted rezoning for OA for a hotel in this vicinity. That
Right.
ensures that all the uses going forward in the area gel with the rest of the existing uses, particularly the amusement park.
So is there a list of what those uses are that also goes with this? Like what would be allowed if the fireworks store, which I think, if the fireworks store was leaving, a list of what could come to those spaces?
Yeah, we do have, in the zoning code is a list of
Okay.
all the uses that OA allows, and happy to provide that.
Okay.
okay, is this something we need a motion on to carry it forward, or what?
I don't necessarily think you need to, because we'll provide you with the motion, and at that point, if council would not like to pursue a council-initiated rezoning, you can just vote to not have that motion carry to initiate the rezoning. So I don't think you need to vote on it at the committee. That's just my
Okay.
opinion. I don't know how you feel about that, Michael.
Okay, all right, very
They
good.
could move to recommend that if they're in favor of it, but ultimately that would be reported out of committee so that you can present it. I think that'd be the best thing.
Yeah.
So,
Okay, so motion to move forward with the OA rezoning project recommendations.
I'll second. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. Now, let's go to the non-conforming townhomes multifamily rezoning project.
Yeah, Diane, if you want
Sure.
to
Well,
steal the seat next to me.
I just snuck in.
I stole her thunder on the previous item, so I'll let her talk about this one.
Okay.
So this just keeps you on your toes. You just don't know what's going to be next. You don't know what we're going to talk about next. You
Are we gonna be on
just can't say anything. And you can't.
Jonathan took the easy one.
Okay.
So as we've mentioned before, with RECO, there are a couple of new districts or a couple of changes to our uses for the districts. And one thing that's also is we had the new RMX 6 district. And that allows for the townhomes and the apartments. And so every townhome and apartment right now in York County is considered legal non-conforming. And the issue comes around when somebody wants to do something to their property. In this case, I showed you a map here of a development off of 160 in the TDK area where they are apartments or condos essentially, and they want to put a deck on and they're not allowed to. And so we've had something similar to that in the Fort Mill area over in Regent Park. Townhomes want to be able to put a deck on and they can't because they're legal non-conforming and they can't expand their use. And so we would like to be able to, similar to that, is to go ahead and start rezoning some of these properties to RMX 6 to make them conforming. There are about, I don't have a number in front of me, there are thousands of units that are this way in terms of townhomes and apartments. And so we have to devise a way to be able, similar to maybe how we did with UD, kind of go through the county district by district and bringing forward those and changing those to their districts.
So you said RMX 6 is townhomes and apartments. I thought apartments were, I thought they were more of a special exception or something.
No,
They're just,
by right in RMX 6.
okay. But there's no RMX 6 that exists, like we were told.
We
like
have a couple now. You have rezoned 2 projects since the recode for RMX 6. Some senior living homes as well as some townhomes in Fort Mill.
Right, so all the townhomes and apartments that existed prior to recode in the county, they were in a previous, or they are in a district that no longer allows either the townhomes or the apartments. So that's what creates that non-conforming status.
Okay.
So this wouldn't affect any vacant properties. This is all property that's already been developed as one or the other. So this is really just helping those folks that are looking to do the decks and the accessory structures, things like that. And on the back end, if a property owner is looking to sell, it might create a complication for them if they've
Okay.
got a non-compliant use on their lot.
So we're basically just renaming them from one thing to the
To
other.
what
So-
they are,
Okay,
exactly.
okay. Do you need a motion on that also? Do you need to do a motion on that too, Michael?
a similar motion would be
Okay.
something you want.
Okay, so I make a motion to approve the recommendation to, for non-conforming townhomes and multifamily rezoning to be a probably county-wide effort to bring those into compliant zoning.
I'll second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay.
Okay. Got that, we got that. Okay, well,
Is Bump coming? Okay.
so I'm,
You can
Let's
start on
go
the
to-
connectivity. You can go ahead and do connectivity.
okay, let's do some follow-up discussion regarding connectivity.
Okay, that's me. Okay, so we, just so the people that are here to learn a little bit more about this know, we had one committee meeting and we discussed connectivity, and the county basically gave us the reasons for connectivity. I still feel like it's something that we should make a little more, I think, subjective, because I think there are times that maybe it makes sense to connect something, and I know of times that it doesn't make sense to connect things. So I just basically want to ask, well, the people that are here today that are concerned about connectivity are here because of the proposed Harris Teeter that would be coming into Lake Wiley, and for the most part, people want a Harris Teeter, but the issue is that I feel strongly that Harris Teeter, it just, like I said, sometimes it makes sense and sometimes it doesn't. In this case, I feel like it doesn't make sense to connect a retail shopping center with a more retirement community, and I don't know what things would make it subjective, but I feel like there are other times that connectivity is probably not in the best interest of the residents. So that's kind of my. Oh, you brought dinner? Welcome, Bump Friday.
Welcome me.
So I'm really just trying to find out is there a way to make this more subjective and allow the planning department to be able to say, yes, in this case it might make sense, in this case it might not make sense. We have a lot of residents in that particular area that it's more of a retirement community, and they are, unhappy, and I don't blame them, because I think it opens up traffic. Just a lot of traffic probably cutting through that neighborhood, and I understand, and I think they would also understand the county's, feeling about being able to get an ambulance in or being able to get a fire truck in. But the funny thing is, we've allowed all of this without having that infrastructure in place for that, and so to come in after something's been allowed, when it didn't really make a difference, we didn't ensure that those facilities were in place. To now come back and make the argument that this is going to be safer, because the safety didn't seem to be a factor when we allowed all of this high density development. So that's my question. I'm just asking for a consideration for that to be looked at a little bit differently.
Well, there are, and I showed them last time we met, there are 5 criteria to allow a dead-end street that's already in our land development code. That's based on topography, environmental conditions, shape of property that might prohibit a connection, property accessibility, or land use relationship. So those are the 5 objective criteria in the code where we as staff would evaluate whether or not a dead-end street was justified. Otherwise, you have to have that connection per code. So as we covered in the Harris Teeter example last time we met, that stub out is already there. It was designed that way, it was required to be that way. So in that scenario, I don't envision any of these conditions meeting that to not have that connection. And as we covered last time, when you've got that land use relationship where the high trip generator, that commercial use, is at the intersection of 2 major roads with a neighborhood behind it, that is how you properly design your road network with the connectivity. If it were the inverse and you had a neighborhood at that intersection and everyone that wanted to go to a Harris Teeter had to drive through the neighborhood to get to it, not just the residents of that neighborhood, then yes, that would be an improper relationship, and we would not approve a connection there. But that's not the case with the Harris Teeter.
So why can the proposed entrances not why are those not sufficient for that Harris Teeter? I don't understand why it needs to connect. If you've got an entrance coming off of 55 and you've got an entrance coming off of 274, why do you need the back end connection? Why does there need to be a connection at the back of that shopping center?
It's for all the same reasons that I spoke about last time about why connectivity is good. You have your, and I don't have the benefit of having my slides.
That's okay.
This time.
You can wing it.
But you have, all the benefits of 911 getting to you quicker. You have alternative routes if there's a blockage. You have much more efficient traffic patterns for all of your mail carriers and things like that. And the most important is to reduce the number of trips on your arterial roadways. And if you eliminate access points, everyone that lives in that neighborhood is going to go onto the arterials, both coming and going to that commercial that's right next to it. If you have that connection, nobody in that neighborhood is gonna have to go to arterial. So all the through traffic, people going up 274 are not going to have to interfere with any of that traffic of the neighborhood going to those commercial properties.
I'm more concerned about quality of life than traffic at this point. I don't think we've done anything, about traffic. I think we've gotten accustomed to traffic. But I think when you talk about people going back out and becoming traffic on Highway 274 or 55, and that being the issue, I think the bigger issue is people cutting through a neighborhood where there are, elderly people walking, or, there's not sidewalks throughout that neighborhood. I mean, I think the reverse of that is the case, but,
Can we ask questions,
So,
or is this appropriate?
Ken?
okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we're talking about specifically the Harris Teeter property now.
we're talking about that as as the example, of this, just being, how many people are here from Somerset or Powder's Cove? Okay. So when I met with the neighbors, and I just called a quick little simple meeting, and 75 people showed up. And wish we had had food and all kinds of stuff. It was going to be a party at that point. But there's just a lot of concern about, I think the access to and from Harris Teeter is more than adequate. And so now we're connecting that to a very quiet, very slightly traveled neighborhood that's mostly, you see them. They're retired folks that have moved here and don't want to feel like they got to pick up and move somewhere else to have that same quality of life. They found a little niche in Lake Wylie. They found a little neighborhood that was quiet, and it's not a retirement community. It's not an over 55 community, but they found a little area that is. That's who's there, and so they're not. We're not talking about Autumn Cove or Bethel Fields or Kings Grove or Lake Crest. We're talking about Summer House, and it's a very unique neighborhood in the area.
Well, I'll say this. When this first came up, even specifically about the Harris Teeter property in you guys' neighborhood, and hearing some of the things that have to be present for us not to have that connectivity. And I think Jonathan laid out clearly that those things really don't exist with your neighborhood and the Harris Teeter property, because it was designed for specifically, whether it was your neighborhood or apartments or before anything was there, the connectivity was already going to be a part of whoever came in and developed, regardless who moved there. And we a lot of concern that. But just to say we don't want it is not enough to overturn what the policy says, what the reason for the connectivities are.
So you'll buy my house? I live right next to the guardrail.
So,
I'm specifically going by what we have in our policy.
Right.
Because not wanting,
It's not open discussion. It's not open discussion.
I'm just stating my position, because policy is policy. If there's something that can change the policy, but just to say we don't want the connectivity doesn't meet the muster not to do it when it was designed to have connectivity. That's part of your county's plan. Not to disregard your desires, but it's our plan. This is what staff has set forward. Whether it was a Harris Teeter coming there, a medical facility, it was gonna be that connectivity. And I don't see how we as a committee can tell staff, don't require this connectivity when there's not enough to overturn the reasons for the connect. If it was a topography issue or other issues that he mentioned, we say, yeah, this doesn't make sense to do it. But we can't always just do something because somebody don't want it. If our policy didn't state it, or if it wasn't designed to do it, that'll be a different story. And
we have policies for a reason, right?
Yeah, but it's not open. I invited y'all, so please don't get outside the lines on this tonight. So what I'm asking for is a review of that policy in cases like this, and there are other cases like this.
What rises to the level to review the policy when it was designed for this? this inlet or outlet was designed to connect. I mean, I'm just being honest, I don't wanna waste you guys' time or my time, because it's in black and white that regardless whether you moved there or someone else moved there, it was laid out for this to be a connecting road to whatever was back there. You know, if everybody showed up every time we had an issue that said, we don't want it, regardless of what your policy said, we always change that because somebody didn't want it, but it's in black and white that we do it. What's the use of having a policy and a plan to move forward with?
Can I ask to elaborate on what the emergency access, you mentioned 911 or something, was part, is that part of the policy?
What about our safety, our lifestyle that we already have? Like,
Policy is not based off your lifestyle. It's not.
Just answer my question first.
Jonathan can answer the question about the,
Sure. So, if you have an emergency in your home, you want the first responders to get to your home
But
as
they already have access.
yeah.
all right, but you want them to get to you as quickly as possible, do you not? So every second counts when you're having a heart attack or there's an extreme health emergency at home, you call 911, intruder, whatever the case may be. If you don't have connectivity between parcels when it's appropriate, as in this situation, their path to get to you is that much longer. And if there is a situation at one of the now reduced number of access points where they can't get to you, now their path is that much longer to come back around
It's
the
that
other way.
much longer right now. We don't need it to be any quicker.
Is it an issue right now, or are people like really dropping dead like that?
There's a traffic study.
We don't.
I mean,
Is
I
there- is
I
there
really
an
the
option?
traffic is.
John,
All
Can-
right,
I just
So you're gonna
we're
stop
cut out-
comments.
we're
Okay,
gonna cut out
guys,
the
we
comments
can't
from
do the
we
comments, we
already just
can't
cut
do
it
the
out.
comments anymore. Okay, so, what came first, the chicken or the egg? The community and then this development was, laid out? Or the development was laid out and then the community? What happened here?
So as Paddlers was laid out, this was not the only connection point that they had as a stub out. This is one of them. So as that community was developed, that stub out was created. It is not a legal termination of a road at this point. It is a temporary stub out. It does not comply with having either a cul-de-sac or a hammerhead T turnaround. So if a fire truck comes down the road, they cannot turn that vehicle around, so they're not gonna come down. Right now, it's only 2 houses deep, so that's not much of a safety issue, but that was never intended to be the permanent solution for that stub out. It was always meant and designed by engineers in accordance with our code to connect to the adjoining property. Whether that was developed commercially or residentially in the future. It was obviously zoned for general commercial, so the likelihood that it was going to stay general commercial and be a commercial property.
I grew up in a great neighborhood where my sister and I and all of our friends could go out and ride our bikes and grow up in that neighborhood. And what I'm asking is for not an answer, an immediate answer, but I'm asking for some consideration, because I don't believe, and I'm not talking about just this neighborhood, I'm talking about other neighborhoods that I feel like is a detriment. Sometimes, a neighborhood to a neighborhood is one thing, and that's how this kind of began. But now we've got, full-on retail grocery stores connected to small neighborhoods that should be much more walkable and rideable and enjoyable than having a retail site connected to them. So I don't want York County to get in this box and to get in a corner of, hey, this is the way it is and we're not going to change it. What I'm asking for is some consideration. We did not connect Yellow Jasmine, and that is the next little neighborhood over. We didn't connect that. I don't know which of these was the reason, but at one point that developer was going to have to spend $2 million for a bridge. So maybe it's environmental, maybe it's topography, but technically they could have put a bridge in and that wouldn't have been an issue. So, I'm just saying that maybe connectivity means that there's I brought this up before, maybe that connectivity is connectivity where these folks, they don't have to get in their car and drive all the way around. They can take a golf cart up through there, and it's a golf cart connectivity. Why does it all have to be just such a commercial connection to neighborhoods?
I think we had a golf cart, okay. Go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I think what you're suggesting is that we reevaluate the policy.
That's what
If
I'm
council
asking.
would like us to do that, we can certainly do that. I think, Jonathan's described an issue where we are applying the current policy that council adopted to this development. And I think that's been appropriately applied. But I do hear what you're saying is maybe there are other cases where we don't want to have connectivity, and our ordinance currently requires that connectivity. And maybe you don't want it to be required, maybe you want
I want it to be
optional
subjective.
Or so. And
some-
we can do that. That doesn't solve the Harris Teeter issue tonight.
Right, I'm not,
But-
that's right.
But it does give us a tool for how we can approach this or other developments in the future. So I'm really just trying to give you an option that we can pursue, which is if you want to have direct staff to look at our current policy and propose whatever modifications we think are appropriate, we'll be happy to do that.
So the example is that the Harris Teeter over in Indian Land, they put in a great golf cart access. And they've got their normal access, but then the access to the neighborhood is strictly golf carts. So we're just trying to maybe think a little bit out of the box and say, what makes this a little more subjective in not every case, and not just because somebody doesn't like something, because everybody doesn't like something. There's at least one thing that everybody doesn't like. I mean, everybody's got something different they don't like. I got things I don't like, and I'm not, asking for anything to be changed. I'm just saying, I would like for this to be more subjective, to be just reviewed and figure out a way. Is there something else that makes sense when you've got something that is that commercial, with already the 2 access points that they need from the 2 major roads? So my motion is that we direct staff to just get back with us with any ideas that they can come up with that would make this objective, that might offer solutions not only for this neighborhood, but for future neighborhoods that are, a connection from retail to residential that could be just a detriment to either one or the other.
I'll second.
I don't think we need a motion or a vote for staff to do that.
Well, she's made a motion.
Well, we don't need a motion.
Do we need a
Well,
motion for that?
I would say if you want
Doesn't
us,
hurt.
if you're directing us to revise an ordinance,
Are we working on a direct revision or just come back with suggestions? Because it sounds like if we're making a vote, we're saying change the ordinance versus, hey, bring us back some things that.
No, we're just saying
Bring it
come
back.
bring it
Well,
back.
which we would bring back, our recommendation or our options. I'm not saying we'd go as far as develop an ordinance, but that would, you would.
I'd just like to hear
I think the way you worded that was you wanted recommendations.
That's right, yes. Mm-hmm.
I think that's appropriate, but that's up to you, to the committee.
I
So-
never heard of voting for a recommendation, but if that's what you wanna do, let's do it.
Okay.
Okay.
Michael says do it.
Do it.
Okay.
I'll second.
Okay.
All in favor?
Uh,
Aye.
Thank you.
Okay, so we'll go back to the top. Discussion regarding tattoo establishments.
Yeah, if I'm, I'll start this off. Had several people been trying to, well, first of all, we made some revisions to our tattoo establishment ordinance. Later to find out that it's still difficult for people to find locations. They would come up with different locations that they thought would work. And I think what's been expressed is how we're calculating the distance from property line to adjacent property lines or neighboring zoning districts is not allowing for any establishments to even get opened. I've spoken with Jonathan a couple times, and he had some suggestions on maybe some possible different ways that we can calculate the distance from the establishment to the property line, because one of the examples that we discussed was if it was a ABC or liquor store that was opening up they use more of a door-to-door versus property line to property line to calculate the distance, because one particular property that's in question right now is the Food Line Plaza on Celanese. If we're going by property line, we have to take into account the back of the property line, and it's a neighborhood behind the property. So you'll never really get a true distance calculated in a fair way, because you have to look at the back of the property line just as well as the front of the property line. But if you were going from whether it was door to property line or another method, which there are different methods that can be used that are more up to date, that are more fair. I just think we don't want to say that we allow tattoo establishments, but then have it in such a way that nobody can open up one just because of how we calculate the distance. And I think, John, you mentioned something about this tattoo establishment is one of the very few that has some torquey little language that has to be some separation.
Yeah, so there are 2 separation requirements for tattoo uses today. There's 300 feet from each other, which I think is fair, so you don't cluster them all together. And then the second is at least 200 feet from any lot located in a residential district or any residential dwelling. And the way that our code defines separation as a baseline, if a specific use does not say anything otherwise, if you're separating a use from a district, as this is from a residential district, that's measured lot line to lot line. So for folks, they might be on a very large lot and they're 1,000 feet away from a home, but they're still adjacent and therefore not permitted. Tattoo establishments, it's a First Amendment use, so it's a freedom of expression, so you can't really forbid it altogether. You can have it separated, so that's a reasonable restriction placed on it. However, as a planning professional, I'd suggest that that separation of that particular use, tattoo artistry, is a little bit archaic at this point in time. So I would recommend that, based on the separation that DHEC already has from certain protected locations, I believe they have schools and playgrounds, that type of thing, and with the separation of 300 feet from another tattoo establishment, I would suggest to you that that's probably sufficient, and that you don't need an additional county-specific separation from a residential district or a residential dwelling. But if it's council's preference to keep that separation from residential uses or dwellings, but modify how it's measured, I'm certainly happy to write that any way council prefers.
Like I said, there's no problem with the 300 feet from one establishment to another. But I do think we need to look at how we're calculating that distance from whether it's a residential or another district.
So on the one, Jonathan, on the one that, we had this issue in the city of Rock Hill with a liquor store and a shopping center. And it was very difficult because this was obviously a place that a liquor store should be able to go. But because of the residences that were right behind, it was like the liquor store wasn't allowed. I mean, it was just, so they had to get an attorney and it cost a lot of extra, and then the liquor store was able to, they worked that out somehow. So in that one example, is the, what is the distance from what is the distance from the door to the neighborhood? I mean, is that 100 feet, or is it? Is it
for the proposed location?
Yeah, I'm just wondering about that
Really,
one.
Rachel, do you recall? No.
I was wondering if it's like half that number.
We're not-
Do you just want to do away with that
No,
whole?
we're not changing the distance, it's just how we calculate the distance. Because, case
Yeah,
in
but-
point, the same instance with the liquor store and the residential, if we were using property line,
You're talking about you want to use it from the front door. I was just wondering what it
Different-
was, what the
different
difference was from the front door versus the,
because one thing that you can use is a normal travel traffic pattern
yeah.
to reach that next, whether it's next district, resident, because some people want to use the crow fly method, which we don't get to travel like the crow fly. We have to go out to the road, take a left, take a right, and wherever the destination is. So just using something as simple as travel pattern, because a property line, if you have a lot, like John said, if you have a large lot, here are the property lines. Your building sits here, but here's your property line. So now, in order to calculate the distance from this property line to the next property, you're basically right up on it. But if the building is here, you have to travel out to come to the road, that is the true natural distance for you and I to travel. But if we're using the property line is here, and the next property or residential or business district could be here. So you have to go from here to here. When, if you're entering this business, you have to come use the traffic pattern to get there.
Right,
Property line is gonna kill
most of it.
pretty much every property that you come across that's in somewhat of a reasonable commercial.
What about the ones that are, I think, tattoo businesses are allowed in, I may be wrong, but I think they were allowed in like shops. If somebody had like a little auto shop and they're out behind their house, or they were working a business, is that not what they weren't allowed to be?
So they, in our old zoning code replaced last year, they were not allowed at all.
Okay, so are they allowed in, something that's considered industrial like that? So,
In terms of districts,
yeah,
I believe it's limited to GC and LI. No, it got taken out of LI, I think, so I think it might just be GC.
And I don't think we're not proposing to change the districts where they're located.
Yeah.
It's just purely how we calculate the distance.
Yeah.
I think the districts, the zoning is fine. It's just how we're calculating it.
yeah,
And if it's helpful, the state's separation for a tattoo facility is 1,000 feet from a church, school, or playground.
so that's still, that, we follow that also?
Well, in order to operate, they've got to apply to
Oh,
DHEC.
to
for a
the
preferred
DHEC,
So
yeah.
that was still,
Okay.
that's still gonna apply.
I mean, I don't agree, I don't disagree with what Bump's saying, I just wanted to be sure, but I thought there was something last year that we talked about, or this time, the last time we talked about this, I thought there was something, because I was thinking that, like, there was a little, my example was there was a little, industrial use on Bethel School Road in Lake Wiley that was it's beside the concrete plant. It's like a guy that just had a shop out in his yard, and I thought that these were allowed in that use. Am I wrong about that? Okay.
Now, didn't we not put something in the ordinance that is not even, can't even do it in Lake Wiley?
Yeah, we did.
So-
whatever we do is not even gonna apply to Lake Wiley.
Well, so when you all talked about this topic last year in committee, when Brandon was in the committee, the three of you talked about it, and provision B, you had requested that have all the same districts that the use need to be separated from, but it was limited to only Lake Wiley overlay and nowhere else. Somewhere along the line, that changed in the motion that Mr. Guffey made at third reading, and so that's why it reads the way it does today. And it doesn't mention Lake Wiley at all, and it references just residential districts and residential dwellings countywide.
So if
So
she
let's
wants
just
to put
make that
Lake
change
Wiley
back,
in there,
yeah.
She needs to put it in if we're gonna do some reworking.
It depends on what the goal is of council,
Which
and
is still
how
only
you,
like
and
what?
how you measure it. The best way to have the separation measured is based on what the goal of the separation is. And Bob, you and I talked about this a couple weeks ago, but if the intent is to have a separation for aesthetic reasons, then you want to have that measured from area of use to area of use, because that's really what you're looking at from your home. I don't want to look at that concrete plant, whatever it is. If the intent is to reduce access to the controlled use by, say, minors or that type of thing, then you want to have it measured by your path of travel, so that it is more difficult for them to, so that's really, they're not going to be hopping fences to get to the tattoo parlor. So they're gonna be walking along the sidewalks, and so that would be the more appropriate way to measure that separation. So it's really about what your goal of that separation is.
So I agree with Bump on that I mean, because I know of that example that he was talking about there, and I'm thinking, I mean, it makes total sense for it to be in that shopping center there. I mean, I was just surprised. Actually, was surprised that was the county and not city. I thought that was part of Rock Hill, but, and I guess there's a lot of that. So, I think that we, leave the 300 feet from each other, so they don't cluster them, and then do we just remove the 200 feet from residential use?
I think that the 200 feet is fine, it's just still how we're calculating it. If we're using property line,
Okay, I got
you
you.
know, Jonathan has the method of how to calculate the distance, but I just don't, property line is not, it's kind of archaic of using that, because
Yeah,
it just
and-
doesn't make sense to use a property line.
And my first suggestion would be to eliminate that B altogether, so the separation for residential. If that's not the preferred option, my second recommendation would be to eliminate the separation from residential districts, that language, and leaving from an existing home. That changes how it's measured, so it's no longer measured from lot line to lot line,
Right.
it's measured from structure wall to structure wall.
Yeah, I think the problem with the way it reads now, even if there's no house there, there's a residential district, you still gotta count it.
Right.
So what Jonathan, I think, is proposing is, it'd be, if there's a home there, you would measure it from the home.
Kind of like the burning thing, kind of like the being able to burn in your yard thing.
What's that all about?
We'll get to that
Oh.
at a later date.
Yeah.
We'll talk about that at a later date.
In short, I think that accomplishes what you were asking, if I'm not mistaken. It wouldn't necessarily mean measured through a way of travel, but it would be measured from the structure itself, from the, like, the front door of the structure, or the closest point of the structure.
Yeah, closest point of the structure of the restricted use to the closest point of the structure of the protected use.
So, using those two hands, you're gonna go straight through the building to go out the back, or would you go around?
You
You're not
would,
gonna-
you would do it linearly, so point of structure to point of structure. And that's how we measure almost every separation is linearly. We don't have any use separations in our current zoning code that is at path of travel.
Oh, okay.
So you may wanna
does it-
reduce the,
But not saying you can't do that, I'm saying we don't have any.
But does that make sense today how we calculate? Because there's no way you can get in that building in a linear pattern, because you gotta come through the front door.
And so, yeah, it gets to, what is the goal of council having a use separation? Is it because you don't want the person living in the home to have to look at the tattoo establishment? Or you don't want certain residents that might be living in the home that might be vulnerable going to that establishment?
I don't
what is
think it's
the
either,
goal?
I don't think it'll be either
No,
one of those.
I don't either. I think, do we need to drop that from 200 feet to 100 feet?
Because if we're going up, if you're doing a linear, I mean, imagine just if the building's a 2,000 square foot building, you're not picking up that much more distance versus the property line, because the front door and going straight through the building out the back to get to another property, you're not increasing that distance. I think that's still kind of archaic to measure, because distance should be distance traveled, not this straight line back to or straight line over, because it just doesn't make, because if it was a liquor store, and I've done some research on the liquor store deal, they're gonna use, if I'm not mistaken, it's a door to door.
Portal to portal through the roadways.
Yeah. And so that's realistic, because you're going from this door to this door for an entrance. That makes sense for distance versus just a straight line.
yeah, I think what we're saying, we can do it anyway.
Yeah.
The current code would either be from lot line, which we're talking about doing away with that. And the other way we do it in our current code would be door to door or building to buildings in a straight line. If you wanna adopt or recommend what Michael Kendry stated, we can certainly write that in the code.
I think that makes way more sense than the linear. I think
And
that's the route we should be on.
let us, I mean, if we've got to bring this back to you.
Right.
We can work with you to show you what we would propose, and if
And use that one as an example to show like what the distance would be, both of those ways, I think.
Generally speaking, we know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
We'll give you specifics when we can draft something, but if you want to make
Yeah.
a motion to that effect, that's.
And
Okay.
oh, I gotta say all that now?
Well,
Bump, you
you
gonna
wanna
say
say
that?
it?
But I'd like to add the Lake Wiley part back in. I don't know how we word that in, but
You wouldn't need to because it also applies to Lake Wiley.
what do you mean?
So, as the committee had requested originally in batch 2, the use separation would have gone away in the entire county except for the Lake Wiley overlay. So, as it reads now, separation B applies everywhere, including Lake Wiley. So are you suggesting you'd rather it not cover the Lake Wiley overlay?
Did you have an expectation they weren't permitted at all?
Yes, that's right.
You know, sir, expectation.
Yeah,
None at all.
none at all.
Was that ever part of the ordinance?
No, I think they left that out.
Right, well,
Separation was in there, but
yeah, the separation was in there for what staff put in for first and second reading, but the motion that was read at third reading modified that separation B to something completely different.
But you're
What it
saying
means
they
to
were
me.
never prohibited in Lake Wiley with the adoption of the ordinance, never contemplated?
Never prohibited, it had, it essentially, the separation B, the 200 feet, applied nowhere in the county except for the Lake Wiley overlay, is how it was written for first and second reading.
Oh, that's not what I thought we ever discussed. That's not even what I thought we discussed at all.
no one's been able to open up one anywhere, so it seems like it's applying everywhere.
So I would suggest that however you want to change it, now's the time.
So what our motion needs to be to redo the distance. I like Michael Kendra's.
So it sounds like you were suggesting a measurement based on path of travel rather than linear measurement.
And can we remove the use in the Lake Wiley overlay?
We'd have to talk about that because
It's First Amendment. Would that come into play?
you'd have to really think about what the stated public purpose for that, because you're really talking about restricting a First Amendment protected use. So as long as there's a valid public interest, and Kendra can speak much more articulately to that than I
But they weren't allowed anywhere when we first started this conversation.
Understood, and there's a reason why it's allowed now. We could talk about that some more.
Okay, so y'all work on that.
So the motion would be to direct staff to incorporate path of travel into the distance calculation method for tattoo establishments.
Okay, I'll second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, so the next item is discussion regarding event venues. Jonathan, you want to tackle this?
I'll start.
Okay, Allison's going to start.
Okay.
Okay.
So, the last thing that we thought we did, I do think helped the event venues. I feel like we, made way for some things. I don't know specifically what those are. The one thing that I asked for is a list of what, is county and what is state. What are the violations that are county and what are the violations that are state? So I'd like to get a breakdown of those two things. The second part of that is that we had several event venues who applied, some that I believe qualify as barn venues, and that's a term that the state is using. So those barn venues applied and they were denied, and there were additional things that were on those. There were additional things that they needed to provide. There was a lighting. I don't have that in front of me, unfortunately, because I am not as prepared tonight as I normally would be. So the lighting plan and the landscape plan. What else, Randy? What else was on that was new?
Let's see here, the sprinkler system. Thing came back up. The ADA parking came back up, which were,
A traffic study.
the there was something about our barn doors were not to code.
Yeah,
Barn
couldn't use barn doors on
Can't use
barn.
barn doors on barn.
Yeah.
Okay, so, let's see here. Right, okay,
They're all commercial codes that came back.
right.
Yeah.
We weren't aware of them.
Yeah. So what I think we need to do is, I think we still need to get a breakdown of what are the holdups as far as the county's concerned, and what are Jamie, the state code that is keeping these folks from operating. What did our last motion do to change anything, Michael? And where we go from here. Now, I have been in touch with Commissioner Weathers. His staff is now working with Harvey Peeler's staff, and they are working on some changes. A couple of states have made some changes, and I have given that information to county manager, and just to see what do we have in writing that maybe they've changed and we can change, and then what things are going to be state that
We can't take.
Commissioner Weathers and Senator Peeler are going to have to address at their level.
If I could maybe start.
Yeah.
And I hear you saying, get county code, state code. I think they're all county codes.
Okay.
We adopt the building code, which is approved by the state. And Jamie, you can correct me if I'm wrong on this. It is a state code that is adopted by the county. So it becomes a county code that we enforce. And in the building code, we have no ability to modify that. So whatever's required in the building code, we have to enforce, if we're gonna have building codes. So the second piece of that is the zoning code or other codes that we may have that regulate zoning, and council can change those however you want to. And we've taken a couple stabs at that, and making special exceptions or distance requirements and all that sort of thing, parking requirements, lighting requirements. That can all be varied by county council. So we're happy to discuss any of those changes you might want to make. Where we struggle is with the flexibility in interpretation of the building code. I think Michael has some ideas that we can explore that may offer some relief, and we're, as staff, happy to look at those, but we have not determined that there's any path that allows us not to enforce those portions of the building code. But we're open to suggestions,
Okay.
interpretations, and consideration.
Okay. So are the lighting, so let's start with this. There are some that qualify and some that don't for what I think we're talking about. I think the barn use is, do we need a definition of what we're talking about, or are they all going to be lumped into one?
So, as David said, we're really talking about there's a difference between the zoning code and the building code. So when our building plan reviewers are reviewing a building permit application, they're not looking at the zoning code any more than they're looking at the traffic code. They are strictly interpreting the statewide building code as adopted by the state legislature and the South Carolina Building Codes Council. They have some own modifications that they put into it. So if we're talking about a barn use, that's not a use. So we have agricultural uses in our zoning code. And so if you're doing general farming, cultivating of crops, animal raising, things like that, those are zoning uses. If you're talking about using your barn for the purposes of holding events, now, per our zoning code, you are an event venue. That is the zoning side of it. Now, on the building side of it, if you are occupying your building for the assembly of people, that is what you are using your structure for. So therefore, you are an assembly occupation of that structure.
Okay.
Two distinct things, one of which council can modify how we deal with the zoning and how the various approvals and the requirements that go along with that, which we just did and made it a little bit easier for these folks to apply for those, and some things about parking and things like that. Now, the building side is where it gets tricky, because A lot of the structures in question are, they were originally built as a barn for agricultural uses and nothing else. So occupation of the building by farm equipment, animals, storage, whatever it might be, that you would use it for an agricultural purpose.
And
Now,
those didn't even require a permit in a lot of
correct.
cases.
So a lot of the structures in question never got a permit of any kind. But now, when you put human beings into that building, now you're an assembly occupation of that building, and that kicks in a whole bunch of safety requirements that the state has adopted. And we can't, as a county, modify that to my understanding. And so we are obligated to require a building permit because now you're an assembly occupation of that building. And that comes with a whole laundry list of modifications that someone trying to use a building that was not originally intended for that occupation to now do something else with it. You can do it, but there's a path that you have to follow. There's probably modifications that you need to do in order to comply with the statewide building.
So where does the lighting and the landscape and where do those things fall in for those?
Those are all part of zoning compliance comments. They apply to any site plan application, which if you're applying for an event venue, that's a site plan of zoning compliance.
So are the applications that everybody had to fill out, those, they're applying to be a event venue? Is that what they're applying for? Is that the application?
Yeah, so if they are submitting an application, there are two options in the code now. Previously, it was your special exception, and that's it. And there was a temporary one in there, but now you have the option of doing the special exception, and you have to do the special exception if you are so large, but you can do the administrative option, which is a zoning compliance. That's what we as staff can approve without the Board of Zoning Appeals. So that's what folks are submitting there as their application. They're applying for zoning compliance to establish an event venue use.
So has anybody been approved?
Yes.
So what's the difference in they've been, like, recently since we've made the change, has anybody been approved?
Yes, ma'am.
So, so what's the difference in them and the ones that haven't?
Well, the one that has been approved doesn't have any buildings, so that makes it pretty easy.
Well, that's, yeah, that's good. That was an easy one.
I'll jump in and say, I've asked staff this, when we started going down this road, I think we opened up Pandora's box. We start out with people wanting to have a serene environment or a wedding or event on their property a couple times a year, to now we were dumping all kind of regulations on it and totally changing the intent of what they started out to do. Understand that if you're occupying a building, there's going to be life safety concerns. Some things we're not going to be able to touch, but I remember talking about having the people to put paved parking. Now we're talking about plantings, shrubs, or whatever. That's not what a rural event, wedding setting, event setting, I think, needs to be. I think we're totally changing what people are wanting to do with their rural setting or farmland or barns or whatever. Some things we're going to be able to make happen, but the building code things, I think, is going to get in the way and really just slam the door on a lot of what people are wanting to do with their properties. If you build a building specifically for events, then yeah, I think all this needs to apply. But if you're just using old shed as a backdrop, or now we're making people install bathrooms, which we know those are expensive to put anywhere. ADA compliant, you gotta have an ADA parking. Just to have somebody come on your property to have a wedding, talk about overreach. That's really overreaching, overburdening somebody who's wanting to do something on a small scale. But I'll stand behind staff to say, if you build this building to host 400 or 500 people for a wedding or event, hey, pull out the code book, reach it to them and say, have at it. Meet everything in this code. But if it's just on your personal property. And I was sitting here thinking, I wish Kerwood Chapel was sitting up here. He would just blast this group for saying, these people have a, let's don't overdo it. Let's try to scale it back, make it simple, something that we can live with, they can live with, and still respect people's safety. We have events in the city of Rock Hill. We have events in the county. We use porta-johns. We're telling these people, you can't use a porta-john at your house. You have to build a bathroom. That doesn't make sense to me. And that's a huge cost burden to someone who's gonna have 6, 7, 8, 10, 12 events. Now, my question is about, didn't we have a special event or special that they can have so many events a year and didn't have to do the laundry list of things that they can not fly below the radar, but still be able to operate to some magnitude? Have we done away with those?
The temporary use.
temporaries.
Yes, we did away with the temporaries in the recode batch amendments that council just passed.
And a lot of the provisions were incorporated into the rural event venues. I mean, they weren't wholesale abandoned, but I think they were carried over into the rural event venues. Some of them,
That
not all of them.
The rural event venues was the temporary option, and
So,
that was eliminated.
We don't even.
But completely.
Yes.
So no one can even come in and get the temporary to have X number of events.
And I gotta emphasize again, anything related to bathrooms is not zoning. That's.
No, I'm not talking about zoning, I'm just talking about what all we require. That-
I understand, but I need to say that even if county council said, rural or any type of event venue, whatever you wanna do, if you want an event venue that is a by right zoning use, we are not gonna regulate it whatsoever. You don't need to apply for anything, you can just have it. We don't care what your neighbors say or anything like that, you can just do it by right. Don't need to apply for anything. Even if that were the case, a building permit would still be required. Now, we would probably never hear about it, as we didn't for many of these venues until we received a complaint. But that doesn't mean that they were by law exempt from having to have a building permit to use the buildings for their occupational purpose.
So we can relax the zoning code as much as you want to. And that's, some of what you talked about was the lighting, the parking, the landscaping. We can relax that down to nothing.
If it's on someone's personal property.
Well, they're all on private
Yeah.
property.
I know, like a residential.
Yeah, we can cater that zoning code however you want to. The building code, unless we can find a way to exempt them from the handicap bathrooms, from the real bathrooms, from, access, in some cases sprinkling, unless we can find a way that they are exempt, then we have to apply the building code to that. I've had some discussions with Michael about a possible path for some exemptions. Happy to explore that with him, talk through that. We've tried a couple of times now to draft something. We always get hung up with the building code. And that is still our what is, hanging us up now. But happy to explore if there's a way that having a few events a year you could do, or, some other provision that allows them not to be classified as a assembly building, but we have not been able to come up with that as of yet. So I'm happy to hear your thoughts on that, or whatever, but it's.
Yeah, real briefly, I need to have this discussion with the planning staff. I just don't want to sit here, but my thoughts were simply, the building code references, building code is very clear, has some very clear language about the A2 and A3 classifications. But the A3 classifications references a state statute with agritourism purposes. The agritourism purposes talks about some cultural recreational uses for rural events, I believe is the reference point. But so the building code suggests a commercial component to it, but it then builds in an exemption for the agritourism uses in the A3 category. The agritourism suggests, when you look at the statute, suggests that the usages of a barn or some farm structure retains that character, notwithstanding the use in an agritourism event. So the thought was, and what our own zoning code does, it defines all event venues as commercial. The thought is that because the agritourism section, the reference to the building code suggests there is some component use of an existing farm that could allow for those structures to be used in pursuit of agritourism, then maybe you can explore. And if you limit the use, an assembly group, also, I'm sorry to jump around, but the definition of assembly group suggests a primary use as a social gathering place. A barn is not, that's not the primary use. So those open-ended aspects of the building code, the state code, and our own code that could be, perhaps have a more liberal definition for those facilities that only have 10 to 12 a year, and you might have to amend the code to create or recreate that rural event venue that I mistakenly thought was retained. In my opinion, it allows, at least for purposes of debate and discussion among staff, an opportunity to evaluate whether you could craft a local ordinance defining that limited use so that the character is primarily agricultural, notwithstanding the use along with its use in an agritourism pursuit. And that's the discussion I wanted to have with staff. That I have not had that since this last initiative started, but I think that's important to have some debate in a different setting and kind of evaluate the merits of those suggestions.
So what are they allowed to do now? What did we pass last Monday? What are they able to do?
What did we pass?
That was first reading, it doesn't change the title.
I mean, so what? So
They're not able to do anything, and we may have to scrap that reading and start over. We need to have that the discussion and see if there's any viability to those component parts. But I think there at least is some open-endedness that allows for that discussion to occur.
Yeah, and I think our desire is to meet with legal, and if there's some way to solve this puzzle, we're very open to that. So I think we need some legal guidance on that. And that's, based on our interpretation of the code for really throughout the direction of this issue.
So this is an example of, and I know this is a different state, but the Senate in Pennsylvania created a Senate bill that would allow farmers to file an annual affidavit that their venue meets certain safety standards, alleviating the costly requirements that are included, my page won't go over that far, in the code for buildings that host weddings, receptions, and similar events. So, I mean, there's a lot of wording here. I've sent these to you.
Right, and the state could do that, but we can't do that. We can't
So-
make that change. The state would have to make that.
Right. So this is I just sent this to you just for that wording. But in our zoning code, I mean, in something, oh my gosh, what was it? We don't even have barn structure listed in our zoning
We don't
code.
define structures, we define uses in the zoning code.
And again, the zoning code is not going to impact our interpretation of the building code.
No.
So, I mean, we can revisit the zoning code as well, and as Bump suggested, make a lot less requirements for landscaping and things like that. We can do that. Still does not solve the building code issue.
So how was one commercial venue able to get out of having sprinklers?
It was interpreted to be either A2 or A3. I don't remember which ones.
Interpreted to be an A3.
As an agricultural exemption.
Is there,
Agritourism exemption.
what would be the fastest way, the legal way, to bring back something that gives these event venue operators or agritourism event locations the ability to operate 10, 11, 15 times a year on a temporary basis while we're still going through this?
again, we don't know of anything that allows that per the building code. We can grant such exemptions for the zoning code, and, you know, if they're only having a few a year, then they're not, the zoning code doesn't apply to them. I don't know that and there may be, as Michael suggests, there may be an opportunity to say the building code exempts them if they're only doing a half dozen a year. I don't see any language in the building code that allows us to do that, but I'm willing to, I don't want to say it that way. We don't know that exists, but willing to have that discussion with legal to determine if that option does exist.
So the one that got an agritourism exemption as an A3 are the denials that went back to the venues that have been denied in the last month. Were those A2 or A3?
So we don't make that judgment until we receive a building permit application. So in order to make that judgment, our building review staff really needs to see the building plans to make that determination.
And that's also determined by the architect for the project.
So what, I mean, if there's been a barn out there for 40 years, there's no architect. So what are they supposed to do?
They weren't permitted to do anything but be a barn. That's what they're allowed to be, is a barn. When you make them something else, there's a different set of building standards they must follow. What we're trying to do to determine if there's an exemption for that. So they can continue to be a barn forever, and they can be a barn use, but once you start having weddings in there, they're not a barn anymore in terms of the building code. That's our interpretation. And if we're wrong
So
on
if the
that,
building code were changed, they would be allowed to do anything.
Yeah, that's a bigger ask too, though, because that's developed by a codes council that we adopt through the state. So.
Yeah, we haven't changed the code.
What do you mean?
So I don't think we'll be able to change the building. Can't change the building code.
The state can.
I mean, certainly,
That's-
county council
Yeah, we
can ask the building codes council to make a change that would accommodate, anything that you're looking for. And as you alluded to earlier, Allison, I mean, this is not an issue that's exclusive to York County, South Carolina. It's a nationwide.
Somebody's addressed it to try
that's
to
why
make it work.
Pennsylvania's looking at something or passing something.
Right, Pennsylvania,
To
North
address this
Carolina.
very issue.
But so I want to get the definition of this agricultural exemption, because we have what I consider, what Bump was talking about, a very retail commercial use who does not have sprinklers. And I don't understand. I need to understand how that happened.
And we can provide you information on that.
Okay.
They were determined to be an agritourism use and exempt, or based on being an A2 or an A3.
Right, and I think that's important to point out, it's not an exemption from everything, it's the type of classification that you fall under that determines the number of people at which you are now required to install a sprinkler system. Everything else, ADA and all that stuff still applies,
They're only exempted from the sprinklers.
Yeah.
at a certain level.
Right, at a certain occupancy. So that's not necessarily the magic bullet that I think some people hope for. It does get them out of sprinkler in the building if they can obtain that exemption.
I think it's a
So I
difference
think we-
between 300 people and 100 people, is that right?
100 people for the A2, 300 for the A3.
And those were after they submitted architectural plans that were reviewed and all that as well.
Yeah, advertise
They advertise what?
600.
It's more than 300.
And I think it's determined by the floor area, it's determined by the architect, it's not determined by
And that's all built, that's state
what
building
you put
code.
tables in there to work. A lot of people say, well, we'll just put 90 chairs in there. Well, if the building says it occupies 300, then that's what we have to go by, not by how many chairs you put in the facility.
So,
So the occupancy code and.
Yeah, we will cover it.
so where can I get the specific building code that like, I mean, I'm not gonna go back to school to learn planning and zoning. I don't have time. But what I'd like to know is, what is the list of things? Jamie, can you provide the list of things that, the check boxes that is state building code, that I can?
Yeah, that's a whole, there's a ton of them. I don't know what, I mean, you'd have to
be looking at we'd have to have a plan in front of us to be able to really do that.
No, I wanna
We can't
see.
just give you a generic list.
I wanna
of
see, okay, then pick 3 of the ones that have been denied and tell me the specific code
Of what?
that affected those folks.
They would have to give us a plan so we could see exactly.
But they've already gotten their violations, they've already
Nothing's
been denied.
submitted. No
Yes,
building
they've been
plans have been
submitted.
submitted.
Okay, so again, we're at the distinction between a zoning application and a building permit application. I think most folks at this point have submitted their zoning application to get their zoning compliance. I think we have very few, if any, that have submitted a building permit with an accompanying building plan that we can review and issue them a building permit.
I think,
Honestly, what they're looking for is a commercial building on our farms, start fresh, tear down my barn that's been there since '99, and start over with a Chantilly that looks like Meadowview. I don't want a Meadowview on my 100 acres.
I still haven't gotten an
That's the
answer.
complaint that they got 2 years back. That's why we're here still, 2 years
What,
later.
what did we do to take away the temporaries that people were able to apply for? Or were they not ever able to apply for some temporary?
They could apply, but again, all of the, and did we have one apply for that, Rachel? Over the last year and change? We had one and they could not get approval because of the building code.
so even though we had a
Same issue
temporary
applies.
use in place, nobody could
get it.
operate.
Nobody could get it.
No.
Because they can't pass the building code.
But if they can pass if they can pass everything, they wouldn't need a temporary, they would get the full blown one.
Correct.
So the temporary is
Building
kinda like
code makes
outfit.
no distinction over
Right.
whether it's used temporarily or not, as far as we can tell. So having a temporary designation doesn't solve the building code issue.
Right.
In our mind. Now, we're open to that, and we'll discuss that, and that, maybe that's a path
We
forward.
need to have a discussion on that.
So give us kind of a timeline for us to get back together again, because we've done a lot of things that
We thought we could.
we've
Yeah.
been pinning the tail, but we hadn't hit the donkey. I mean, really.
Okay, can I ask one question? On the agritourism aspect of this, is that, part of still the building code? I mean, the agritourism code, is it separate from the building code and from the zoning?
It's a
What's-
state
what's-
statute, the agritourism statute is a state
It's a
statute.
state.
It happens to be referenced in our South Carolina building code. It's adopted.
Okay, so is that
At least one
part of
component.
ours?
It's part of the state building code, correct?
Yes.
I think that one, the agritourism, what's this, agritourism use of, I think, is that a little more relaxed? Do we think people can meet that a little better than the?
The agritourism exception puts them into the A3 category that allows them to have up to 300 without sprinkling.
So they don't have to sprinkle the building. Everything else still applies.
Everything else, okay, well, nothing ain't there.
Everything has to do the sprinkler and, no.
No, that's impacts when you have to sprinkler the
Uh-huh.
building, but you still have to have meet ADA requirements, you still have to have access, you still have to have proper electrical,
Yeah.
all that, even if you have the agritourism exemption, as I understand it. Again, happy to explore that, with legal to see if there's another way to interpret that or some concessions that we can make. We don't know that they exist, but happy to look at that.
Yeah.
So let's just, so we don't have to keep coming back and doing this same thing again, what questions do y'all have that we've maybe missed? Because
Well, with the agros, as far as meeting the exemption that I submitted again this year, that was declined, for the Chantilly, it came back with commercial codes. I'm not a commercial building. I don't want to be a commercial.
did they classify you as A2 when that came back?
It's an A2. But these haven't been looked at. None of our barns have been looked at. We all got the same non-approval.
Has the county been to visit, have they ever been out to look at anything?
Came one time. See, I still have 88 back homes, 88 properties, got a big driveway.
Well, see, what do you not have, Randy?
I don't have, well, I do have outdoor lighting, but I don't know what outdoor lighting they were talking about. And there's barn doors on my barn.
Yeah, we have barn doors.
I have push doors. I spent the fortune to get glass push doors. My situation is the
That never
toilets.
got adopted.
Building the restrooms, which is a nightmare because no one will accept it.
Kinda like what you said, Bob, about not being able to have a porta john.
Right.
But am I to understand that if I tore the building down completely and put up a tent, I'd get approved? With the same toilets?
Yeah.
That tells me.
I was gonna ask, who said they had 100 acres? So if you put up, I was just gonna say, if you put up tents, temporary tents, would porta johns then be acceptable?
Yeah, apparently.
Yeah.
They fall under a different part of, I mean, if you wanna ask the building official, they're different, they're treated differently. If you have a building, a structure, it has to have bathrooms that are plumbed and have a municipal sewer or septic tank. Jamie, you wanna talk about why a tent can have a porta john and a building cannot?
Yeah, a tent's a temporary structure. I mean, the building code is, it's written for a building. And that's why they call for the bathrooms, because all bathrooms gotta have public facilities. I mean, all buildings gotta have public facilities. Some facilities gotta be. Sorry.
What was the question?
How does the rest of the country do this? Barn venues are not something unique to York County.
Right.
They're an international trend that's been around for 25 plus years. They're all over the world. How are we so unique, or you would say in the corporate world, how are we such a unicorn in York County that we cannot come up with a solution?
Right.
I
I know
mean, like, a tent is no different than a barn door that used to, it's called an open pavilion. You open the sides of the barn door there, it's open all the way around.
Yeah.
So you can get your equipment in and out. What's the difference between that and a tent? Just because it's a solid roof. Yeah, I mean, it's not like we're trying to stand up a Walmart. People just wanna come out and enjoy a rural event. And it's like that all over the world. And so like, in York County, we've gotta find a solution that's acceptable, that meets everything. And I understand, I mean, like, I enforce code in the corporation all day long, all week. But you have exceptions and you have waivers and you have mitigating controls. So what's the exception, the waiver, and the mitigating control to allow York County, which is one of the fastest growing counties in the state of South Carolina, to be able to serve its citizens and offer them rural, you know, the rural activities that they're looking for? People are not looking to go spend $25,000 to $26,000 in Charlotte. I mean, like, I'm not saying like blow it all away, but we've got to quit being a unicorn. We're the fastest growing county in the state of South Carolina.
The state of Pennsylvania toned it down to one exception. The barn has to have approved electrical. Everything else went out of the way. North Carolina too. That's the 2 states.
So we,
They recognize that the barns in Pennsylvania, people are gonna go and do this. They're gonna get married there regardless. It's gonna happen. So let's try to protect them in the most blanket way. Have the barn, have approved electrical. And that's where they stop. That's it.
Well, I'll say, I applaud you guys for sticking in with us, because it's been a long journey, probably a year and a half, 2 years.
Well, I would say,
And we haven't been able to figure this out yet. You know, we thought we were doing something that would help, only to find that there was another door waiting to be opened to come in and say, hey, you still can't do it. And I don't like putting things in place, only to find out that we thought we did something good, but we really didn't do anything to move the needle. Event venues, tattoo establishments, or doing something else that comes up that we thought we did good on, but I'm with you. I can, and I know you guys have spent time, effort, money, try to do this, but
So all we're asking for is 10 events a year, 10 weekends a year. I have less than 96 people that come to the Red Boot Ranch, park, go down to the wedding tree, get married, walk back up to the barn, eat barbecue, listen to some recorded music, and go home. That's what we're asking for. It's not like we're asking for the world here. So it's 10 years.
so, I guess the conversation is going to continue, but can we kind of have an idea of how long it's going to take to have that discussion? Because it's been already a long time, Laura.
The thing of it is, Allison, is the question I have is with this affidavit, that if I don't give to Eddie or Rachel by the 22nd of this month, the $500 a day, I'm not signing that affidavit because I didn't meet compliance for commercial code. I'm not a commercial building, I shouldn't have to. But they want that and have called and emailed and asked. And that's kind of upsetting.
Did
Well,
you
being free to
know this was going
work
on?
from here.
Did anybody on council know this was going
All
on?
right, can I address the code enforcement aspect of this? So, with the code enforcement cases and the letters that everyone receives when you get a violation, everyone gets the same letter. The only thing that changes is what your violation is and your options to cure it. Everyone gets the same language, and it is an option, an enforcement option under state law for counties to have a violation sent to court with the option of each day that the fine exists, that it could be a separate offense with a separate fine. We do not do it that way. So it's an enforcement tool that we only will pursue if we are not getting some form of cooperation from the property owner that has the property under violation. Now, when we're talking about the affidavit, that is an opportunity that we are offering to close out the violation on those properties. So we no longer have it in our system as something we need to actively enforce. If you are signing an affidavit saying that we are no longer going to pursue this use that is not allowed on our property any further until we apply for our proper permits and get it approved to the normal course of business, then that closes the case. You won't see our enforcement officers. They're not going to call you and ask, where's your application? How's that coming along? Are you holding any events? It just closes the case. So that's
When I reached on it, it doesn't read that way.
that is an opportunity to close out the violation that we have issued to all of the venues that are under violation. Most of them have taken that opportunity, and their violation cases are now closed. And they are able to pursue getting properly approved at any point in time that they feel is appropriate.
I didn't know we were still writing violations while we were kind of working through this. I thought some of that kind of had ceased a little bit.
They're the same violations that we've had from over 2 years ago.
And we weren't continuing to write them
It's
either.
the same one.
Yeah, it's the same one that's been open since.
I didn't get it until I got my non-approval.
I wish we could have used this affidavit in another situation I've been working on with a car lot. He wasn't asked to sign an affidavit to shut down business. And I've said this to staff several times, but we didn't know I didn't know this was going out.
I didn't either.
I don't think nobody on council knew it was being done this way, because when I first heard it, I was like, who does this? Who? Because I immediately said, well, why didn't we get this situation to sign an affidavit, the one that we've been working on for quite a while?
And it
So
does say,
affidavit
it
was
does
new
say
to us.
$500 a day. If I were these folks and I had not been able to operate for a couple of years for what we feel like is nonsensical, not because of you, but because of the code, it's not your fault. You're doing your job. County's doing their job, but it absolutely doesn't make a bit of sense. So if I got an affidavit in the mail that said that I was going to be charged $500 every day, which is what they say, I would be very offended. And it's almost offensive to me because I really want York County to be working hard to make this work, not to enforce whether or not someone's operating or not operating, or have they signed an affidavit or have they not signed an affidavit, and the communication between them all, because they're all talking to each other, but there's no communication between the county and them. So everything is by mail, and you get an affidavit, and you get an affidavit, and then you get the follow-up phone calls, which I've tracked on a couple of these, and the interest is more about getting the affidavit signed than it is about
Working with them to make it work.
calling and making this work, and y'all getting together and talking about it, and let's come up with something, because
I'm sorry,
we
I have to disagree with that characterization. Our staff has been communicating with the event venues nonstop.
That is not true. That is not true.
But communicating in, I mean, I don't know what communication is, but let's just say this, that when part of the room doesn't feel like they're being communicated with, then maybe we need to do a better job communicating. And I mean, we passed this a week ago. We talked about this being on an agenda as quickly as possible. We get it on the agenda, we get to the committee meeting, and we don't have anything, because y'all gotta talk about it, and I just wanna know, I don't wanna leave this room until I know when we can meet again, because we're gonna schedule that damn meeting tonight and get this done. I am working with Senator Peeler, I am working with Commissioner Weathers, and I promise you, they are very interested in getting y'all back in business. They are very interested in that. So if York County is going to be the county that lights the fire under them and gets something done, then let's do it as York County. Let's not do it as venues and committee and individual departments. Let's do it as the county. Let's get this resolved, and let's let the South Carolina Association of Counties let the rest of the state know what we did to make this happen. I mean, I don't want to wait and read what Lexington County does and Saluda and everybody. Let's do it. Let's fix this.
Jonathan, how many folks are under violation right now?
Everybody except one.
No.
I don't know.
Everybody except one,
What's
but only one got
the
approved.
current count, Rachel?
They're not, and they don't have a building yet.
Oh, they have a building.
Yeah, the
Okay.
approval they got is not built yet. But this affidavit that you're speaking of, Jonathan, absolutely reads, I can't have an oyster raised, I can't have junior welfare league out for their charity every year. This doesn't just read about the handful of weddings I do a year. This is my personal property that you're saying I can't have anybody on. This is the
Listen, are we gonna have
It's more
a discussion
than
attacking staff tonight? Is that what we're
Okay,
gonna do?
well, I'm just trying to get a couple of answers for myself, okay? I just
Okay.
want a couple of answers, and then we'll talk about how we're gonna come up with an answer here. What you got over there? How many?
Well, it's a little confusing because some folks have submitted, we're waiting for them to resubmit.
But it's gonna be denied.
Are we talking about 30, 20,
No.
We don't have that many.
10?
15.
There are 11 on my list entirely.
Okay.
And so, like, for example, Red Boot Ranch, they submitted for their zoning compliance application in August. And they received their comment letter later that month.
Are they under violation?
Well, this puts him in sort of a confusing spot, because they either need to resubmit and move forward and address those comments, or they need to say, we're not going to operate anymore.
What if you just never hear from them again?
We're going to check them out.
What if they don't resubmit and they don't sign the affidavit?
There's a fine, it has to be attached somewhere.
Yeah,
if they
we're
receive an
obligated
affidavit.
to send them to magistrate's court at that point
For what?
for a violation of having a unpermitted use on the property.
Even if they're not having an event, they're not doing an event?
It would be incumbent upon them at that point to prove that they are not. Because we have received a violation, we have issued a notice of violation saying there is an illegal use of the property.
What is the violation, so is the violation that they've held events that they weren't authorized to hold?
Correct.
So I heard one example of I've heard one example of a private event not rented to the public. Hey, I got some friends, 20, 30 friends coming over. I have this space in the back. We're going to use it. I've been told I can't use it because I was using it for rentals, but now I can't even have a personal without being considered using it improperly. Are we that?
No, it would depend on the characteristics of that event. If I'm under violation for a use of my property for an event venue that has not been permitted, and I'm under active violation, and I host a birthday party for 30 of my family members, that is not an event venue use. That is not
Okay.
a violation of your existing event venue.
Randy, when was your last event?
Last November.
So a year later, he's under violation. He hasn't held an event since last November, and he submitted in August, and he was denied with some questions, and he's under violation,
But he hadn't been using it.
We are not
or
pursuing
he's
enforcement.
got to sign the affidavit.
We are not pursuing enforcement right now. We're working with him. We've made comments that he can respond to. Now, if your example is he never responds again, then we'll have a decision to make how we move forward. But we're working with him, trying to get him into compliance.
But he can't meet the requirements. So if he just says, well, just forget it, I'm not gonna do anything, we're gonna turn him over to a magistrate judge a year later because he didn't sign an affidavit?
I'm not comfortable discussing individual enforcement cases in a committee meeting.
I'm just looking for kind of an example.
I'll be happy to discuss the situation with you outside of a committee meeting.
Well, okay.
And that is a case we would have to prove to the magistrate. And if we can't prove it, then there's that's on us. That's all.
So,
We may not even pursue it. We're working with him right now to try to get it approved. He's not under any threat of going to court right now.
But he's getting calls. Are you aware he's getting calls from the enforcement guy asking him when he's gonna sign the affidavit?
Are you gonna resubmit, or are you gonna tell us you're not doing an event?
The Chantilly's getting these calls from them.
What if he just says we're not gonna, we don't know what we're gonna do yet?
That's all, well, if he's gonna commit to us that he's not having events, then there won't be any enforcement. That's what the affidavit does. But again, I'm not comfortable discussing individuals' enforcement.
I understand that, but I just wanted an example. Because I'm trying to understand the affidavit and the push for the affidavits to be signed, and what happens if they're not signed. If somebody can't meet the requirements, they decide, hey, we're not gonna do anything, but I'm not willing to sign this affidavit. I mean, that's.
The upgrades would cost over $250,000. The revenue we bring in for the barn venue is less than $18,000.
Okay, so
It's just not
can I make a
viable
suggestion?
Sure.
to do the upgrades that are gonna be required.
Okay, my suggestion is, if I could volunteer myself to come before you guys, talk with you on a one-on-one basis, and let me get an idea of what we're looking at here, because I had no idea about this. I would like a better understanding, and then I think Kendry would like to work with you, Jonathan, on what could happen.
Yes.
A new, or do what we talked about with the agritourism code, how we could work that in there, maybe with the building code and so forth. Would you guys trust me to do
Sure.
my little, would y'all trust me?
Absolutely.
Okay.
I guess my thing, just hearing some of what's going on here recently, I guess my question to staff would be, is this the detriment to York County that we have to hone in and, I guess, I would say 24-hour police this situation with staff time? Because I'm pretty sure we have a lot of other more pressing
I don't
issues.
think that's a proper characterization.
Well,
I mean, because it's
let's-
not what, I'm just saying.
These have been violations
Yeah.
for 2 years
Yeah,
now.
and we've been working on this for 2 years.
And we have
We've
not
been working on
pursued
it.
enforcement for 2 years in order to solve this. Once the new ordinance was passed, that put them in violation again, and that's when we started enforcement.
You think they're talking about the thing that we did last month?
Whenever
No, the RICO, must have been the RICO.
Was it
passed.
RICO'd?
So,
No,
yes, we are
It
charged.
wasn't Rico, it was the last.
The thing that we did the thing that we did in when?
2 months ago.
2 months ago, which we in good faith thought
we were
was a
doing
good
something.
thing.
Yeah.
But
And
we are charged
But we
with
didn't do nothing.
enforcing that ordinance. We don't get to pick and choose which ordinances we enforce.
But
If
we
coun-
passed a new ordinance you're talking about?
Understood, and if council passes it, we enforce it.
But why didn't we know this is gonna be the outcome?
You have the ordinance in your packet for you to read. We've had workshop after workshop about this. This is, building code issue should not be a surprise to anybody. This is the very issue we raised 2 years ago that we said couldn't be solved. So that's where we are.
So is it building code issue that,
It's both. But
Building.
they're in violation for operating in violation of the zoning code.
Correct. So their violation is a zoning code violation, but most folks here can't clear that violation and continue to operate their event
We just
venues.
heard it's $200-something thousand for him to
Because of
come into
building.
compliance, so he's not gonna come into compliance. So he's either gonna have to get some exemption in the building code, which, again, we're willing to look at that, or he's not gonna be able to operate feasibly in his situation.
Well, this says that we won't get this solved. I mean,
I will
Just-
work diligently.
hey, have at it.
I mean, hey, it's not working how it's
No,
going, so
No,
do we need a motion on me working
no,
on this?
no, just
Okay.
go for it. Need a motion, to adjourn. Are we done?
No.
What do we got left?
Okay, so
minutes?
minutes.
Make a motion to approve the minutes from the
Okay.
July the 10th, 2023 Planning and Zoning Committee.
Second.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Yeah. Okay, do we have anything in executive session, for executive session?
I certainly hope not.
Okay.
Can we get a motion to adjourn?
Oh, I make a
Motion
motion
to adjourn. I thought we did that.
No.
Well,
All in favor?
Will you send me, I need a copy of that.